fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the fourth episode of The Last Voter. Today, Keegan and I are going to be talking about redistricting and gerrymandering. If you've been paying attention to the news at all recently, a lot of outrage over maps such as Texas and Virginia, Florida, California. They're all talking about redrawing their districts, and even the Supreme Court has been getting involved. They just recently made a ruling on the Voting Rights Act, and we're going to get into that. And today we're going to be looking at some existing maps such as Virginia and Texas, which are in hot debate right now about whether they're constitutional or fair. As an exercise, we're going to be using a site called Redistrictor to look at Minnesota and the different ways we could cut up the map there with its 8 districts and see how those votes kind of change as the lines of the map change.
So gerrymandering is the practice of redrawing political district maps to gain an unfair advantage for one party or the other. So basically, what they're trying to do is take population centers and absorb rural votes to expand that district and get more representation for, one party or the other. Gerrymandering was actually named after the governor of Massachusetts in 1812, Governor Eldridge Gerry, or Gary. I believe it was there's a little tidbit out there that we've been saying it wrong because it was actually Eldridge Gary, not Jerry. But he signed a map that looked like a salamander in Massachusetts. So that's kind of where the name came from. But the earliest instance of gerrymandering I was quipping about earlier and kind of found ironic was the earliest instance of it was actually in 1788 in the state of Virginia, where I currently reside. By Patrick Henry trying to prevent James Madison from getting a seat in the House. And now if you look at the map, what I find ironic about that is Patrick Henry was actually an anti-federalist, which, he wanted smaller government. And now you have the big government party trying to redistrict Virginia to take most of its power away. So I found that kind of ironic with that tidbit of information there. And gerrymandering is actually a continuous process. It usually happens every 10 years. What sparked the huge debate about gerrymandering here recently is the fact that Texas did it mid-decade. Usually redistricting or gerrymandering happens every 10 years after the census, because that's how it's supposed to work, is you get representation based off of population density. The more population you have, the more representation you get, right? That's how it's supposed to make sense. So that's what sparked everything more recently, is Texas doing it mid-decade, and then the Supreme Court ruling that you referenced in the intro there. What that came down was it was actually a Louisiana map that was ruled unconstitutional because they were trying to make districts that basically were just all one demographic. So that way, obviously they're going to get their own representation. And I guess their own representation isn't accurate, but they get more representation than they should because it creates a new district and kind of takes them, once that district gets population dense, they use that to take away more of the rural vote around it. So that's kind of where I think the Supreme Court kind of ruled that you can't have a district, drawn basically just to include one group of people and not everybody, because that's just not
right. You can't draw on, it's already in Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, you can't draw maps to discriminate based on race. But what this ruling essentially decided is you also can't draw to benefit a minority race. It was all meant to give, Black voters more voting rights and more access and fairness, but really they flipped it on its head, like everything, like DEI. Used it to pretty much step down on your white population or your majority population, which is also in turn more Republican in a lot of those areas down in Louisiana. Yeah, so we can see here that this blue area, which is a Democrat heavy voting area, even though it's just signifying it's over 50% Black voting age population. You can see they pretty much just drew a wall around the Black population in this stretch of land here. And when you see these shapes,
Almost like
that's
the Berlin Wall right down through the
yeah,
state, just
right.
cutting it in half.
It's like a huge scar down down the whole state,
Yep.
and then all these are under 50% Black voting age. So you're pretty much is segregating an entire um, population segment is based entirely on race, which is directly against the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, if you really think about it. Yeah, that's the whole question is like, could you redraw a map, you gerrymander it in the name of racial justice, um, quote unquote racial justice, which is really just a facade to um, segregate your black voters into their own districts while, pretty much giving them a majority status in these districts, even though maybe they may only make up, say, 20% of the population. Now they're over 50% of the population. And if what we're understanding about redistricting is correct, it's like you want to try to even that out. You want to avoid a disproportionate overrepresentation of any segment of the population if you can help it. And if your
Right.
intention, I think that's part of the decision. If like there's clear intent, like that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to give a certain segment of the population a larger voice over another. You're trying to disenfranchise another part of the population. That's unconstitutional, and which is the exact case in Louisiana here.
Right. And that's why the Supreme Court ruled, that it was unconstitutional.
hmm And now it's gutting the Voting Rights Act, but nothing's really been gutted. It's just been clarified because
Right.
people have been you know playing games with it over the past 40 years, maybe more.
Well, it's been it's been a power grab. It's what it is. It's been slowly using the system, trying to, skirt the lines of it and use it to their benefit to um, try to flip the scales. Just like the much like the abuse of the birthright citizenship.
Right. Exactly. Really, what's only appropriate when it comes to redistricting is kind of making districts that vote together. Like you're not going to stretch your Baton Rouge area all the way up to, say, Shreveport.
Right.
You're going to have more consolidated districts that have more in common, more values, more industries in common with each other, rather than going purely off demographic. If they vote similarly, they should probably be grouped together. That's if you want to separate into Republican and Democrat voting districts, that's fine, but don't make a huge freaking streak down the whole thing. It's pretty bad in a lot of
Right.
these maps, especially Illinois, which we're probably not going to touch on today. But if you're curious, just go look up a map of Illinois' districts and you'll see exactly the worst gerrymandering you've probably ever seen in your life.
I mean, really, if you look at the existing map versus the proposed map of Texas, it doesn't look that egregious. They just cut the tail off of a district there, really,
And
and
they
tightened
split they
in.
split this thing into three little things here.
Yeah, but it doesn't
And
really
it,
change
it
it
really
that
looks
much.
pretty bad up in this northeast corner.
I mean, if
And this
anything,
this isn't too
it
great either.
up up in that northeast, though, if you look at it, it looks like it makes it less because the deep red is a higher vote margin, right?
So it'd be skewed toward Republican heavier than in say these.
Right, but that northeast part you said looks kind of bad, but really it looks like they're giving more votes back the other way rather than, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
I thought you were saying the existing map
Yeah, but
doesn't look too just
what I'm saying is as far as like they're making it sound like it's a big power grab by the Republicans. If anything, in that northeast part, they're giving more power back,
right.
and they just like cut the tail off. If you
Yeah,
look at
this is way more competitive now in here.
right, that's what I'm
And in
saying.
here, this whole district,
Right,
because they pretty much actually looks like they came in here and absorbed this, because that's what everyone was complaining about, is this fucking district in here, I think,
Right.
because
And
they
down here,
eliminated that.
and if you look down at that one, just like right
This
right
thing.
where it goes, like, yeah, and that too. But
Yeah,
it
they
really made
fixed
other
that.
districts more competitive.
Yeah, like it gave more of a bump. Really, they lost these, what's that, 5 heavy Republican districts, made these more competitive.
Right.
Or made these more competitive, and then took away. They lost. All they're losing is 3, somewhat safe / competitive districts in their favor, but Republicans are losing 5 safe districts.
Right.
So I think it's a pretty even trade-off there, especially
Yeah.
with these are certainly battleground districts here that they've added in.
Right.
I mean, maybe you'd say this perfect white one would be a battleground, but I'd say like that's just barely tinged red is why it's tan. Like there's
Right.
probably like a 51% margin.
Looks like they're actually giving up part of the panhandle down there, or part of that boot down there too.
Oh, down in here, yeah. Yeah, it's not bad, honestly. This shit is bad. That's bad. All this shit. Like, how could you
The
justify
Virginia
this
map.
over this?
Look at the Virginia map, and how, like, look at that.
Yeah. It is fucking awful. What is this? You know?
Look at that lobster right there, right in the middle.
Yeah.
Lobster.
Coming to you live from Monster Lobster. It's the man vs. Lobster.
That's so ridiculous. All the way from the coast. Yeah,
We got-
let's go in
we're
here.
getting-
Actually, over into here too, into the mountains.
But I mean, yeah, look at how bad that is. Like, that's obvious.
Fucking
They're
dice
fucking
this shit up. Look at this.
yeah.
Yeah, nice district here. It's pretty well formed. And you just fucking let's slice right into it. And I think this even dips into that district too. You
Yeah.
split it into 4 different districts, 5 if you include this one coming up to absorb the rest of it.
Right.
Maybe even, oh, that's the same one. But yeah, 5 different districts have now taken over this one district to make it from a somewhat Republican leaning district to 4/5 Democrat leaning.
Right. Like, Virginia is a pretty even state usually when it comes to voting.
Mm-hmm.
That this definitely flip flops that map.
Like how can you justify a 6-5 advantage for Democrats to 10-1? How could you even say that a 6-5 advantage to the Democrats in Virginia with this map is somehow unfair to Democrats?
Right.
It doesn't make any fucking sense. If you wanted to like fucking cut up this East Coast some and kind of, play around with this, that's somewhat understandable. Like if you wanted to address this kind of section, sure. But like over here, there's no reason to touch any of this.
The problem is a lot of that's rural. So it's a lot
Exactly.
easier. It's a lot easier to observe the more rural area by extending that population from Alexandria,
All
which
the
is
way
where you
in
get
here,
that
yeah.
lobster tail down in there, where they're absorbing more of the rural scattered vote into a population heavy vote area. So that
Right.
way it basically just erases those Republican votes with the heavy Democratic presence of Alexandria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely egregious. It doesn't make any fucking sense why you would do this other than to disadvantage Republican voters in the state.
You're a smart motherfucker. That's right.
Would you already have an advantage over them? It is quite an improvement on what they got.
Yeah.
And to see this redistricting, to see this redistricting, and then Democrats in other states be like, oh, we got an answer for that, and
Right.
then do that.
I find it kind of fitting though that the earliest instance of gerrymandering was in Virginia in 1788 when Patrick Henry, an anti-federalist, attempted to steal a seat from James Madison, basically. And now, the big government party is trying to fucking strip basically a lot of the representation here.
Right.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? That
Yeah,
someone
it is.
who was a big proponent of smaller government and trying to strip a seat from someone, now the other party is trying to fucking basically undo what he was trying to do.
That is heavily ironic.
It's really kind of crazy looking into a lot of this older stuff, thinking that, how much of it happened here with, the early government, and how a lot of the people were born here in this state that wrote the Constitution. And, that's why I think it's so frustrating to me to see how it's being turned when this is, like part of the birthplace of this country.
Mhm.
A lot of the crafters of the US Constitution were born here in this state. The first president was born here in this state.
And now we're taking a shit on the history of this nation right in that very state.
Seriously, like where several of the founding fathers were born and started, planning their revolution.
And what's funny is it's happening because of a bunch of carpetbaggers that weren't born in Virginia moving there because of DC, turning that
Yeah.
whole northeast section blue, and now with a controlling share of the government with their trifecta, they're just doing whatever the hell they want.
Our governor wasn't even born here. She's from Jersey. It's just ridiculous, man. It's crazy.
Hmm.
The founding fathers would just like they'd be so ashamed of us. We have fallen so far from like what the image of this country was supposed to be.
Oh yeah, it's night and day. There's not much resemblance to anything that they put in store or put in place for
Right.
this whole nation. The Constitution these days is more like a suggestion.
So these are we have the actual Minnesota map here of what it looks like now, and then a couple hypotheticals that you made, correct,
Mhm.
using this districtor webpage where you can kind of go in and look at a limited historical data of voting and patterns and population, correct?
Yeah, if you look here, we got pretty much from 2018 back to 2020, yeah, 2012. You can go into like
But
U.S.
not
House elections or statewide elections.
but not all. It doesn't have that for every state though.
Not every state. Minnesota seemed to have the best selection of elections to
Of
choose.
historical data.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at the 2018 U.S. House election, given that we're looking at congressional districts, which would determine their representatives to the House, and 2018 being the most recent year available. This all based off of 2020 census data. With the way the current districts are, divided up, we can see kind of the share. This is the vote share statewide. So 55.8% of our voting age population votes Democratic, and the remaining votes Republican. The seat share is kind of the number of districts and how they voted. So we got 3/8. Yeah, 3/8 of the districts voting Republican. That'd be District 6, District 8, and District 1. Then the remaining would be voting Democrat. And overall, not terribly unbalanced, skewed a little bit toward Democrat, but you really can't get better than that without it just being 50-50 down the middle, which in that case would be a little bit overrepresented for Republicans. So either way, someone's kind of getting the short straw in the way our districts are divided up.
Right.
And yeah, there's not too, egregious of gerrymandering or anything. Though what you can do is we can kind of break this down population by race. And you're gonna run into this with large urban areas, but if we zoom in here to the cities, District 5 here has an overrepresentation of Black and Hispanic races, their communities. This
Right.
bottom row here is the baseline. This is nationwide, the population breakdown between these three.
Dumbass!
So ideally, you want to be in line with these. But yeah, like Keegan and I were discussing, unless you bring this all the way out into the rural area where, all the white people are, you're not going to get a very, even representation there. You're going to end up with kind of a skew. So you could say that, almost 3 times what the actual population breakdown is kind of bordering on egregious.
Well, I mean,
Um,
if you look at how some of these districts are shaped too, like, like, does it really make sense to have like Pac-Man eating something right there?
right. Yeah. I mean,
I mean,
when you get in here, I, you'll see on my other maps, like I pretty much extend this district or like the power within the cities kind of out to these suburbs because
right,
you pretty much absorb these suburbs into as far out as Minnetrista and Waconia. When Waconia's they got a high population and you kind of get into a little bit more of an urban setting as you get toward Victoria, but it's still pretty rural. Like there's a lot of farmland out here
right.
even in between Victoria and Waconia. So to lump it in with Bloomington is kind of questionable. If you get
Especially
out to St. Michael and Albertville, like I mean, there's strip malls and stuff out here, but again, some few and far between patches of land out here. Not a whole lot of
right.
towns. But yeah, if we compare this to, I think this next one I'm pull up is my first attempt at an egregious gerrymander, kind of a pinwheel like
Right.
layout. And you can see over here that the the seat share drops significantly for the Republican Party. You only have one district that skews Republican, and it's only about 54% of the vote share
And that would
in
really
this
be
whole
like,
district in here.
this would be like really maximizing using your population centers to absorb a sporadic rural population, because what
Yeah.
some people may not know is a lot of Minnesota is actually super rural and forestry. It's not all big cities.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
like all this up
so
here is pretty much, boreal forest land.
it's a very
You
sparse
know.
population up around that Canadian border.
Hmm.
Once you get
And
up past Duluth, it gets pretty sparse.
that's why you have these huge districts up here. Zoom out. That's why these are
Right.
so expansive. Is because like until you get like down here and south, you don't have a huge population to pull from.
And in there also in a lot of those districts, there's a lot of native reservations also.
Hmm.
So they
Yeah, we
have
could even
like
go into
little
here and show
population.
tribal governments.
Yeah.
So all these shaded regions, you can kind of see them go in. So you got some out here, big one up here in Red Lake, some down in Mille Lacs, and yeah, and especially as you go north, they're all north.
So
Rarely, I
those are
think there's
pretty
one
much,
little pocket in Prior Lake. That's
I
about
mean,
it.
and those are pretty much your pockets of population through and all that patch of forest too. So I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of gives you an idea of where the people are living in that areas in those areas.
Hmm.
I mean,
You can
so
see how everyone votes
right.
and compare that with these districts. So yeah, this district here is a nice little tool to go through some of this stuff.
And so that would
And
be like maximizing your population centers to absorb the rural areas around them.
yeah, like this is what Virginia's doing, but on crack.
Right. Pretty much.
This next one is another gerrymander map. Um, Surprisingly, comes out about the same for at least the House election. It comes out the
Right.
same seat share as what we currently have. So, but you do have a stronger Republican district in this number 6 here, and that's kind of by design. I, started, kind of down in the southeast corner and pick up all these blue. This is like another one where I kind of left all the red precincts and stuff and absorbed more of the blue into this number 5.
Right.
And then, yeah, all this is, you got Duluth and all these mining cities and counties, the reservations that vote pretty strongly blue.
Yeah.
Although, if you look at it, they're skew. They only got 53% of the vote, pretty much. So even with that, because that shows you how sparse it is out here, because these are pretty strong blue centers up in here
Right.
and in here, but like
And
all
Red Lake.
this is enough to kind of offset it. I mean, even your Duluth, I think that's only like, what was it, like 80,000 people in
I
Duluth?
think, well, I mean, I know the population was probably like 88,000 or something like that, but I know Duluth is also a sanctuary city, so I'm sure that population has blown up over the last, few years.
Oh yeah.
I know I know Duluth is I don't know what it's like now, but I know when we left that area about 2 years ago, it was starting to get pretty pretty packed. I
Right.
mean, you had all those homeless people living along 4th Street and stuff, so
Hmm.
who knows what the actual population is now, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, getting the cities here, you can kind of see how that's broken up. Kind of encircle around. Make sure you don't go too far outside the
Still got the
cities, so you can still
Pac-Man.
get your yeah, still get the Pac-Man. He just lost some weight, and you gotta make sure your strong coalitions in here stay strong, but maybe take a little bit of these more rural areas out while you're at it.
Right.
Um, disparage their vote a bit. But yeah, like you can see, when you get shapes like this that just kind of wrap and sprawl, long skinny shit that just really doesn't make sense. That's how you know you got some egregious gerrymandering going on.
For
Like
sure.
Rochester's very blue. Oh yeah, why don't we stretch it all the way out into the cities, and then everybody in between here just kind of gets fucked.
Oh yeah, it's a
you know.
population center.
Hmm. So
But
yeah,
I see it's a lot of farmland down there in southern
right.
Minnesota too, because
Yeah, I
that
mean,
goes down. It
even when you
runs into
get
all
right
the
down
cornfields
into
in
here,
Iowa.
yeah, you'd be surprised just how um, suddenly you start running into farmland just south of Burnsville here,
Oh yeah, it gets real
even
rural
out in
real
here.
quick.
Hmm. Whereas like the west side of the cities, you kind of have a little bit more of a taper or like a gradient. Like you could say, Waconia is somewhat rural. When you get out to Mare, it's very rural. But Mound, it kind of it starts getting into like that Minnetonka. Even though Minnetonka's over here, you still got Lake Minnetonka, and you get all this you know high income area, a little bit nicer shops and more around.
Right.
And Chanhassen is Shakopee, even though it can get kind of red out here in Chaska. um you can see kind of like these precincts start opening up a bit. They start getting bigger because the population density is lower, compared to here. But like it's similar to what you're going to see in like Burnsville,
Right.
um, out here in Shakopee, but you're going to see more farmland out there too. But then even on this east side, like you get outside of Oakdale and then boom, just nothing out there. There's just small to large, precincts out there.
So what would the most even? Do you have a map that shows the most evenly like possible representation of like evenly split between Republicans and Democrats? Did you make one
Yeah.
of those?
Yeah, I think it's this one here. Yeah, so you have 50-50 split, which is not terrible considering a 44 to 55.
Right. I mean, it's never going to be perfectly 50-50,
It
obviously.
can't with
And
8 districts.
right.
And here you kind of have central to west central Minnesota. You got southwest Minnesota, southeast Minnesota, coming up to like just south of Stillwater. You kind of have your urban area split into 3 major components here, with west central Minnesota kind of coming into Brooklyn Park a bit. And that's essentially to, one, grab some population to meet the requirements, and two, kind of break up that racial stronghold that this second district has, because
Right.
there's a good black population up in Brooklyn Park area, Brooklyn Center. And even with the this absorbing that, you still have 14.6%
Right.
share of the black community in this district here. which it's going to be hard to get away from that, like we talked about, just because there's hardly any Black citizens that live outside of the metro, and you can't split it evenly.
Right.
But yeah, the thing I ran into making this map that was the most hard to justify, or the hardest to justify, was bringing this district all the way down into Stillwater. Though I don't know, I tried to make a point not to bring it too far into this suburban area. I had it take in Ramsey, which is pretty it votes pretty differently than even Anoka, which is right next to it.
Right.
They're usually lumped into a lot of things together. But I tried to keep them to the east of the river, try not to cross it, because part of making maps, for people who don't quite know, you want to also take into account geography. Like,
Right.
you're going to have your rivers be a dividing line, and a lot of times it just makes sense. Like, if you're not taking into account geography, you're just going entirely off demographics
Right.
and population density. And that's when you start getting into issues where people contest map drawings. So you want to stay away from that. St. Cloud is kind of split up. It's mainly in this Northwest district, but a little bit is in this West Central. So you got this whole Northwest, like, all these districts are the same population. Like, you can see the deviation is only 0.04%. So they're pretty even.
Right.
So that just shows, like, what we're talking about, how sparse the population is up there. But this
So
is another.
basically, if you split the state up evenly by population numbers, this is what the districts would look like.
Mhm, exactly. And this is another area that was, like, kind of challenging to navigate, because this is the Iron Range in Minnesota. And so most of our mining happens in this strip from, essentially from Ely down to Deer River down here. And so kind of what I did is go along that line of mining and kind of split that up somewhat between um, this Northeast and Northwest district. And that could be,
That could
problematic
realistically
in
be a
some.
nightmare for the mining corporations, though, because
Exactly.
different districts, different counties, different
Mhm.
regulation.
Yep. So that's the challenging part there, is like, would you do it? Probably not. Could you? Yeah. Yeah,
You
especially.
probably just need to move that line one way or the other, and that's part of that not being able to make it fair.
Mhm.
You know what I
The
mean?
problem with this Northland being so sparse in these areas, you get huge pockets of population in these areas, like Virginia and Chisholm, Hibbing. So if you take this, so you take Keewatin, that there goes, like, maybe like 4,000 to this Northwest, and now you got to make up 4,000 over here. Where do you pick it up? Try to get it up here, and then all of a sudden you have to go all the way up into here, into Big Falls, to make up for that population, and now you have a huge protrusion. So if you drop this down, you almost have to wrap this all the way over into Red Lake. So
Right.
that's challenging, and that's I essentially put that there because, like, I wanted to see if there is a way to take this kind of coalition of mining, like, that power, away from the Duluth urban area, because they have a huge part in the mining up there. I mean, especially the shipping,
Right.
but you also have a lot of your environmentalists that are just gung ho anti-mining, even
Well,
in a safe
pipeline
way.
too, because
Yeah, the
you have a lot of
pipeline shit.
pipeline through Minnesota and Wisconsin right there.
Hmm. Whereas, like, this northwest section would probably be a little bit more pro mining, pro pipeline, and you'd have a lot less hangups on
Right.
that front. So trying to toe that line is difficult.
Right.
There's a lot to consider going to making these maps, but to compare to what we got. This is I'm going to pull up the current one again. You can just kind of see the differences. Like this is pretty much got absorbed into here. This got carried out here. This came into here a little bit more. This absorbed some of that, came into here.
Right.
And it ended up making it more even, but who knows? Like we were saying, it could have caused some issues in some industries as well.
Right.
And I had a couple others here. This is another one. Keeps it all together, that whole Northland. Then you got pretty much full central Minnesota, kind of upper central, and then lower central and southwest, and then the entire southeast.
And metropolitan.
The metropolitan, yeah. You got another kind of weird Pac-Man shape here. But if you kind of look, it does kind of stay rationally within kind of the influence of the cities and how everything votes. Like if we look at this, you can kind of see, like out in this area, it gets a little bit like these guys are kind of getting fucked by the cities.
Yeah.
But you really only have like one strong red district in that whole section. Otherwise, the rest of this is pretty light. It's competitive. And you even have a blue section in here. I can't see what city, Rockford. I guess they vote blue in a sea of red, but
You're always going to have a pocket.
always going to have a pocket. Just like up here, like in there. There's one. Where was it? Yeah, this guy right up in here. Just South White Lakes. Like, yeah, it is deep. Yeah, it doesn't really make much sense. I wonder who's out there, honestly, but
who knows in that state?
Judging by the size of the precinct, not a lot of people. Last district I have, pretty similar. If you tab back between these, kind of similar split here along the north and the south end of that.
Really though, the solution to probably a lot of this is getting rid of allowing politicians to gerrymander, period. It needs to be the way these districts need to be formed needs to be based solely off of people who are here legally and have the legal right to vote in our system. Voting is not a quote unquote basic human right. If you've shown to be incompetent, you shouldn't be able to have a choice in our system. And if you've come here illegally, you shouldn't have any protections under our system and don't have a right to vote in our system if you haven't, followed our laws and come here the right way. So, we've allowed politicians to do the things to give themselves more power for too long. And that was the whole point of limiting the presidency, was so he didn't consolidate powers. But, we've allowed the swamp, as it were, to grow and grow in the House and the Senate. And it's, things have got to change. This is why people feel disenfranchised and voters feel like their votes don't matter, because, you have these crazy districts being expanded from population centers to absorb more of the rural vote. And that those are the people who quit voting and don't show up, because what's the point when it's not going to matter because you have a population dense center voting for you.
Exactly. I mean, it's completely demoralizing once you feel like you don't have any influence on the elections. Like your whole county could vote red, but if you're absorbed into part of the metro area that completely dwarfs your county's voting power, then you end up not showing up anymore, and then
Right.
just radically flips to the other party.
All right. Well, that's just been a little bit on the hot topic of the hour of gerrymandering, a little bit of history for you, a little bit of before and after maps of what's been in the news, and then what it would look like if we actually broke up a state by population evenly. Some of the districts just don't make any sense to me, especially when you look at the Lobster District in Virginia, or even that Pac-Man district there in Minnesota. You know, it just, I don't know, weird stuff. I think we got to stop allowing the people who have the power to give themselves more power. And if things are going to be redistricted, it needs to be after the census of legal citizens only, and then done by a nonpartisan group to make it as fair as possible. So
Like
if you like what
Virginia
you saw
had.
here, what's that?
Like Virginia had.
Yeah, I mean Virginia was pretty fair one way or the other. You know, it was a 5-6 split. There's some other states that used to be that way too before they were gerrymandered into oblivion, and now you just have some states that are, you know, beating down everyone, and there's just a flip flop. So um, something's got to change. You know, we got to do some things different. But if you like what you saw here, please like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See you guys later.